continue on with section 8.4. So now we're going to look at gerrymandering and electoral geography. So in the past, with the beginning of 8.4, when we talked about the different types of government, we looked at it from a global scale, but also mentioning stuff that could, refer to stuff within the United States, including, the idea of, federal, state, and, local government. So in this case, gerrymandering and electoral geography will look predominantly just at the United States. So let's get started. So to understand electoral geography in the United States and why this matters, okay? So in the United States, we have legislative districts and boundaries that change every 10 years due to the census, which, this being 2021, census is going to come out, 2021, and then we'll use it in 2022 to determine, not only national stuff, but also local districts as well. All right, it's done every 10 years with the census, so each district has to have a similar number of people. And so not only does this determine a lot of stuff in relation to, political leaders and, what districts you're in and the number of, members of a local government or even the national level, how many representatives that you get based on, shifting demographics and population shifts. So that includes birth rates, death rates, and migration patterns, but also determines, things like school funding, emergency funding. So a lot of other stuff beyond just, who represents you in, government. All right, and so like we said, done every 10 years with the census. So they have to have about the same number of people, again, to kind of shift that. So local levels, I think it depends on, so we're not talking like, cities. We're talking about like legislative districts. And we'll, again, look at examples of this so you can kind of see that here within Iowa. We'll come back to that. But the boundaries also have to be what we consider to be contiguous over land. All right. So in many cases, we talk about, islands and stuff. That doesn't really affect it. But, essentially, all of the districts have to be connected over that same territory. I couldn't just have District 3 over here and then also part of it over here and no connection. They have to have that unless they're separated by water. That's the only different circumstance. So how this plays in with the national government, but also local stuff too, in terms beyond just the funding piece. Okay, so the Electoral College has 435, sorry, not 435 seats. That's not the Electoral College. I'm going to delete that real quick. Okay, so the House of Representatives, okay, not the Electoral College, House of Representatives has 435 seats, and that is an allocated number. That number has not changed in a very, very long time. And so what they do is, depending on, states that are growing, again, due to population growth or migration changes, states that have more people will get more representatives. States that have fewer they might lose it or they might stay the same. So states that have, the smallest population, they only have one representative to represent them throughout the entire state. So that's like, I think Montana, Wyoming, I think fit in there. I think there are a few others that have, one. I think Idaho might fit that. But yeah, as more people move into an area, they don't add more seats, but they just realign them. So again, you can kind of look at, what states are gaining seats, which states are losing seats. And they also reportion that, again, also within states too, what areas are gaining population, which ones are losing it. So again, population is really, really important here. Okay, so this also decides the congressional district locations, so what congressional district you're in and voting for, and statewide races as well, as we've been saying. Now, this is not always done fairly, and this is where that definition of gerrymandering comes in. So that's the process of redrawing the lines, the legislative boundaries, for the purpose of benefiting a particular political party or a certain group. All right, and this is done by elected politicians. And that's really going to be our focus here. So on the opposite side, however, instead of politicians always doing it, you don't have to have politicians doing it. You can have, independent, nonpartisan commissions. And some states definitely do that, where they draw it up in terms of ensuring political parity, equitable representation, things of that nature. So keep this in mind that when we talk about gerrymandering, all right, it's essentially drawing the boundaries to benefit one party or group, as we will see. So some examples of why gerrymandering, or what gerrymandering is, how it happens. So these are just some very vague descriptions of, drawing maps for different electoral districts producing different outcomes. Okay, so we have over here on the left 50 precincts. Okay, so local areas, so you'd have 60% yellow, 60 and 40% green. All right, so if we were to do this into different districts, okay, into 5 districts, with 10 precincts in each district, you could have very good representation where essentially, you end up with even numbers being represented. So, everyone, is represented fairly or equitably in these cases. But you can divide it up that favors one party or one group. Hence why you have disproportional outcomes, okay, where in this case, if you divide up the 10 districts, or sorry, the 10 precincts into this one, you end up with this yellow group, okay, winning each one because they are a 60% majority in each category. Okay, and it's always based again on location. So, 10% live here, 10% live here, 10% live here, da 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 da. So in each case, when you draw the lines like this, however, yellow wins every time, and these people do not get any representation. You could also draw it this way, okay, where the green, despite the fact that they're in the minority, where they have fewer people, end up winning every time because if you draw the lines in this shape, okay, where they end up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, end up winning 3 of those locations because they end up being the majority in 3 of them, and then the minority are non-existent in 2 of them. Okay. If you look down here where you get proportionate outcomes, okay, it's like, hey, we're going to put all the greens here, we're going to put all the yellows here, and they all get their representation. But again, is that really equitable? Because you're like, well, they're not even living next to each other, or there's no competition here. Just like, there's competition, but not a whole lot within these ones. Or there's the proportional of, dividing them up, but each group still has a, decent shot of winning in each section, okay, where there's a majority, but it's not overwhelmingly in each area. So there is competitive districts, okay? So why this matters, why this happens. Okay, as we said, to benefit one party or one group of people. So when we talk about the specific examples here, okay, here's one from Florida in the 1990s. So remember what we said. They have to have equal number of people, or about the equal number of people, okay, and they have to be contiguous. They have to be connected by land. All right, and while you can't see it, there's a little sliver that connects this little spot here within this ridiculously third district that no longer exists. And so this was considered stacked voting. Okay, it linked like-minded voters from distant areas through oddly shaped boundaries. And this is oddly shaped. It's stacked. Even though it doesn't look stacked, you're combining all these people in a very awkward shape to make sure that they have the ability to vote for each other and not be, cut out in these other districts. Okay, so it's contiguous, it fits, and it has the same number as districts 5, 2, 6, 4, 7, 8, da 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 da. So more, general examples, you have your wasted, or what we also call cracking vote, which spreads opposition supporters across many districts to make the minorities in each. All right. So when you look at this, you talk about, having, red and blue, so Democrat, Republican. Okay. In this case, you pretty much spread the opposition across, or in this case would be, I would assume, the Reds, or in this case what we consider to be Republicans, in this general idea, across many different districts to make them a minority, with the exception of number 1. Or you look at this one over here, which is known as excess or packing. You're packing people together. You are essentially concentrating them into a few districts, or into one district, to again make them a majority in one spot, but minorities everywhere else where they might be otherwise competitive. So you can kind of see the majority overwhelmingly in blue, and while there's decent blue numbers everywhere else in these other districts, the way it's drawn, however, makes them the majority only here and makes them the minority in other locations. While on the opposite here, the wasted one, okay, spreads them out so variably that every time that makes them the other group a minority. And both parties have been guilty of this over time. All right, so some real-life examples. So looking here at North Carolina, and here's some things to keep in mind. Okay, Republicans in this is 2018. Okay, Democrats won just these few districts, 1, 4, and 12. And here's what you have to understand. Statewide, Republicans got 50% of the votes, but won 10 of the 13 seats. Okay, and a lot of this is done, and you kind of see the margins here, because of the way in which everything was set up in terms of how they divvied up many of the districts. All right, and there's a video from Vice that we're going to watch in class that we have watched in class, depending on when you watch this video, that really looks at that into more specific areas. So looking at Wisconsin here, okay, so this is Wisconsin State Assembly elections, and you can kind of see the changing demographics here between 2008 and 2016. okay, that you see a massive shift in the districts from Democrat, Republican in the area. All right, so that's a big 8-year shift within that. So to look at this in terms of about what districts looked like in 2008 and 2010 versus 2012, where the districts were again in many cases shifted. And again, some of this is natural. Other times, however, it is done for the purposes of gerrymandering. You can kind of see divisions of different ones and how they're kind of shaped. Okay, so in 2008, this is the year of Barack Obama's first presidential election and his win. Okay, Democrats got about 1.5 million, Republicans about less than 1.2 million. So they're short of about a couple 100,000 votes there. All right, and so this is the state this is congressional districts. Or no, I think this is the state congressional districts. Okay, in 2010, Republicans won more seats. All right, and they had more votes. But in 2012, Democrats won, again, a slightly less margin than they did in 2008 in the previous presidential election. But even while they got more than 50% of the vote, they lost more of those seats. And gerrymandering helps to explain that because, again, you look at how the districts were drawn, can help to sort of explain some of these changes. All right. So we'll look more about Minnesota when we're actually in class. But the big comparison is Iowa because, again, there's no oddly shaped districts, really awkward shapes. And even in Wisconsin, it's not terrible in comparison. But again, the way you split it, you could easily make a competitive area or one that was leaning one direction by changing the boundaries just a little bit, can completely shift it in terms of one party and make the other party the minority party. All right, very much done. So things to keep in mind about political geography. Okay, when we say about political geography, we're talking about the term of gerrymandering. Okay, in most cases, it is legal. Okay, it is held up in many times in front of the Supreme Court. Okay, because it can benefit groups who have been historically had no voice or underrepresentation. No, it can benefit groups who have had historically no voice or have been underrepresented in government. But that has actually been proven unconstitutional. So if you draw up a map that again, gives voices to Hispanic Latinx people, to Democrats in a specific area, or African Americans who again typically did not necessarily have a whole lot of political power, you could draw a district that would essentially keep them together. Although technically that part is unconstitutional, but that was one reason it was done. Other things to keep in mind about the geography piece, okay? And we've talked about this before in class. Liberals typically are living and concentrated in urban areas. Conservatives are typically in rural areas, okay? Again, farmland, all right? And so in many cases, even if you were to try and do that fairly and try and get equal representation of both parties, that wouldn't work in a lot of different places because, again, in most cases, urban areas are definitely more likely to vote, again, Democratic, and, rural areas more for the Republican Party. So, again, when you play out, parts of Minnesota, well, it's like, well, you look at these areas, and most of them are still very much, these are the rural areas where you see that. Now, again, the numbers vary based on the precincts and the number of voters in each area. But again, that helps to explain that even if you try doing this really, really well, the balance doesn't always exist because there might be, this might be heavily Democratic in this area, but there's also fewer people on the Red Lake Reservation than there are, in some of these certain towns and areas. So reapportionment doesn't always have that in mind because, again, just based on where people are living, you can't say that that's gerrymandering. All right, but when, again, you're shifting the boundaries around, so again, looking at that example within Florida, okay, that is specifically gerrymandering, and it's just absolutely ridiculous. And you can look at, and the book has a few other examples too, but you can just Google gerrymandering, and you will find other ones as well, okay? And so, as we said, though, political gerrymandering is legal, and even when it comes before the Supreme Court or state courts, usually they just kind of sidestep the issue, all right? Other things here, so again, this is the video that we're watching in class on Vice News that helps to explain some of this. And then there's the redistricting game for extra credit. So have fun with that if you would like. All right, and again, this is a very fun topic. I like to discuss it more than when we did here. And there's a great book that Mr. Getz has. It's not an appropriate title, but you can definitely ask him for it if you would like. And then also, If you take AP Gov, they definitely look at this also as well. All right, so that's where we'll stop here with political geography and gerrymandering.